January 17th, 1944, Bougainville Island, Solomon Islands. The jungle breathed in the pre-dawn darkness, a wet, suffocating rhythm of insect hum and distant bird calls. Japanese Lieutenant Satoshi Yamada crouched behind a fallen mahogany trunk, his rifle slick with condensation, watching the American perimeter through field glasses caked in mud. For 3 weeks his battalion had observed the enemy encampment from the ridgeline above, counting men, mapping trenches, waiting for the order to strike. But something was wrong. The Americans weren't digging foxholes with shovels and sweat, as Japanese doctrine taught. They weren't fortifying their positions with sandbags hauled on tired backs. Instead, enormous yellow machines, louder than any artillery Yamada had ever heard, tore through the jungle like iron demons, carving roads from wilderness, leveling hillsides, reshaping the very earth itself in hours, what would take thousands of men weeks to accomplish. Yamada lowered his glasses, confusion tightening his chest. In all his years of military training, in all the tactical manuals studied at the Imperial War College, nowhere had anyone prepared him for an enemy that arrived not just with soldiers, but with an industrial revolution in tow. The machine he watched that morning was a Caterpillar D7 bulldozer, 13 tons of American engineering powered by a diesel engine that could generate 75 horsepower. To the Japanese soldiers who first encountered these beasts in the Pacific Theater, they were incomprehensible. The Imperial Japanese Army moved supplies by hand, by horse, by sheer human endurance across impossible terrain. Soldiers carried 60-pound packs through malarial swamps, hauled artillery pieces up mountain passes on their backs, built fortifications one shovelful at a time. The concept of mechanized construction on the battlefield, of treating Earth itself as an enemy to be conquered with industrial force, belonged to a different universe of warfare entirely. When Japan had swept through Southeast Asia in 1941 and 1942, victory had come through speed, through soldiers who could march farther and fight harder on less food than anyone thought possible, through adaptation to jungle and mountain that their European and American adversaries couldn't match. But now, 2 years into the Pacific War, Japanese commanders were discovering that America fought by different rules entirely, rules written not in Tokyo's military academies, but in Detroit's factories and California's shipyards. The Bulldozers' arrival in Pacific combat zones beginning in 1943 represented something Japanese strategic thinking had catastrophically underestimated: American logistical capacity. While Japanese forces calculated warfare in terms of fighting spirit and tactical brilliance, America approached war as an engineering problem requiring industrial solutions. The U.S. military had shipped more than 3,000 bulldozers to the Pacific by mid-1944, along with graders, scrapers, and earth-moving equipment that transformed remote coral atolls and jungle islands into functional military bases within days. At Guadalcanal, American engineers built Henderson Field's initial runway in just 17 days, a feat that would have required months using conventional construction methods. At Bougainville, where Lieutenant Yamada watched in growing dread, American Seabees, the Navy's construction battalions, carved 3 bomber-capable airstrips from raw jungle in less than 6 weeks. The bulldozer became more than a tool. It became a weapon that struck at the psychological foundations of Japanese defensive strategy. But the transformation from construction equipment to combat weapon came not from Washington's planning rooms, but from necessity's crucible in New Guinea and the Solomons. Japanese bunkers, constructed with meticulous defensive genius, proved nearly impervious to conventional infantry assault. Built from coconut logs layered 2 and 3 deep, reinforced with coral and earth, these fortifications could withstand direct artillery hits and emerge functionally intact. American Marines and Army infantry learned the terrible arithmetic of frontal assault: dozens of casualties to eliminate a single bunker, hours of fighting to advance mere yards. Then someone, accounts vary, but most credit frustrated army engineers at Buna in late 1942 had a brutal epiphany. If a bulldozer could push through jungle, why not through fortifications? The first combat bulldozers were desperate improvisations. Engineers welded scrap metal plating to the machine's cabs and engines, creating crude armor that could deflect small arms fire and shrapnel. The blade itself became a weapon, a 13-foot-wide steel wall that could absorb machine gun fire while advancing steadily at walking speed. Tanker crews, watching these armored behemoths lumber into action, called them tank dozers, though the name never quite captured their alien menace. Unlike tanks, bulldozers weren't designed to kill through firepower. They killed through suffocation, burial, obliteration. They sealed bunker entrances with tons of earth, entombed defenders alive, collapsed entire defensive systems under engineered avalanches of soil and debris. The psychological effect on Japanese defenders proved as devastating as the physical destruction. Sergeant Hideo Takahashi, who survived the American assault on his battalion's position at Cape Gloucester in December 1943, later wrote in his diary, captured after the war and translated by Allied intelligence, of the moment he first understood what the bulldozers meant. "We heard them before we saw them," he recorded, a mechanical roaring that grew louder and louder, that didn't stop when our machine guns opened fire, that kept coming like judgment itself. When the first machine appeared through the trees, pushing them aside like rice stalks, I thought perhaps we had angered the gods of this land. Our bullets sparked off its steel skin. It felt no pain, showed no fear. It simply buried Lieutenant Harada's bunker. 30 seconds of work and 17 men gone beneath the earth, still alive, screaming in the darkness we could not reach. What Takahashi described was the fundamental horror of industrial warfare meeting human fortification. Japanese defensive doctrine emphasized spiritual strength, the warrior's willingness to fight to the death from prepared positions. Bushido code transformed each bunker into a shrine of resistance where honor demanded sacrifice. But bulldozers recognized no honor, no sacrifice, no courage. They simply pushed, inexorable, mechanical, indifferent. Americans' operators, protected behind improvised armor, could seal bunkers without exposing infantry to defensive fire, could eliminate resistance without the brutal calculus of assault casualties. The bulldozer made Japanese defensive virtues irrelevant, transformed fortifications built with suicidal determination into mass graves constructed by the defenders themselves. By 1944, the US military formalized what battlefield necessity had invented. Technical manuals specified bulldozer assault tactics, how to coordinate with infantry and armor, how to seal bunkers systematically, how to clear fields of fire, and create killing zones where Japanese defenders who fled their collapsing fortifications could be engaged by waiting riflemen. At Saipan in June 1944, Marine Corps after-action reports noted that armored bulldozers eliminated more than 40% of Japanese fortified positions during the first 3 days of fighting, doing work that would have cost hundreds of American lives using conventional assault methods. At Peleliu that September, bulldozers sealed more than 500 bunkers and cave entrances, entombing thousands of defenders. The machines became so integral to Pacific operations that commanders factored them into pre-invasion planning with the same attention given to artillery and air support. Yet the bulldozer's symbolic weight exceeded even its tactical value. To Japanese soldiers trained in deprivation, educated in the nobility of suffering, the presence of such massive machinery revealed an enemy whose material abundance verged on the incomprehensible. American forces didn't just have bulldozers, they had enough bulldozers to allocate dozens to single islands, enough to lose machines to enemy fire and immediately replace them, enough to use them for everything from combat operations to building recreational facilities for troops between battles. Imperial Army intelligence officers, compiling reports on American logistics, struggled to convey the scale to commanders whose frame of reference couldn't accommodate such excess. One report from November 1944, captured at Leyte, noted with barely suppressed desperation, "The enemy constructs in one day what requires us 1 month. They waste machinery on tasks we accomplish with human labor. Their supply is endless. Victory through attrition is impossible against such resources." The bulldozer, painted its distinctive caterpillar yellow or military olive drab, became a recurring motif in Japanese soldiers' accounts of American operations, the mechanical beast that announced an enemy who conquered through plenty rather than prowess. While Japanese troops rationed rice down to grains, while ammunition shortages forced defenders to fire one carefully aimed shot, where Americans fired hundreds, while diseases born of malnutrition and inadequate supplies killed more Japanese soldiers than combat, the bulldozers pushed and roared and rebuilt, symbols of a nation that approached war as an industrial project requiring unlimited resources applied with mechanical precision. Captured Japanese documents frequently mentioned the machines, always with a mixture of tactical analysis and something approaching existential dread, the recognition that they faced not merely a different military, but a different civilization entirely, one that had mechanized even destruction itself. The psychological transformation this recognition produced rippled through Japanese forces as the war ground toward its conclusion. Soldiers who had charged Allied positions with absolute faith in spiritual superiority began questioning whether courage alone could overcome such material disparity. Officers who had dismissed American fighting quality as soft and undisciplined, a racist assumption that Japanese propaganda had cultivated since the war's beginning, confronted evidence that Americans simply fought differently, that they substituted machinery for casualties, that they valued their soldiers' lives enough to send a bulldozer instead of a banzai charge. This wasn't the warfare of samurai tradition or even modern infantry combat as Japan understood it. This was something new, something that reduced battle to engineering specifications and logistical mathematics. By Iwo Jima in February 1945, Japanese defenders knew the bulldozers would come. They prepared deeper bunkers, reinforced with concrete when they could get it, connected by tunnels the machines couldn't collapse. They fought with ferocious discipline, inflicting 26,000 American casualties in the bloodiest single battle of the Pacific War. But still the bulldozers came, working under fire, sealed caves, cut supply lines, built the infrastructure of defeat into the volcanic rock. At Okinawa that April, the last major battle before the planned invasion of Japan itself, bulldozers worked in round-the-clock shifts, their operators rotating to keep the machines in constant operation, pushing, burying, building, the rhythm of industrial war that never slept, never tired, never stopped. Japanese defenders, starving in their caves, hearing that mechanical roar echoing across the island, understood they were facing not just military defeat, but obsolescence. That the warfare they had trained for, believed in, sacrificed for, had been superseded by an enemy who brought factories to the battlefield. The bulldozer never appeared in the heroic paintings of Japanese war artists, never featured in the propaganda that Tokyo broadcast to sustain civilian morale. But in the letters Japanese soldiers wrote home, the ones that survived, the ones found on corpses or in captured positions, the machine recurs like a nightmare image. They have machines that build while destroying, one soldier wrote from Bougainville. We fight with steel and spirit. They fight with industry itself. How do you defeat a mountain? Another, found dead at his position on Okinawa, left a diary whose final entry read simply, "The iron beasts are coming. Buddha have mercy on us, the iron beasts are coming." In the war's aftermath, when scholars and historians tried to explain how America had mobilized for global conflict so effectively, they spoke of industrial capacity, of manufacturing output, of the arsenal of democracy. But perhaps the bulldozer, unglamorous, utilitarian, brutal, captured the truth more precisely than any statistic. It represented an approach to war that treated destruction and construction as complementary engineering problems, that deployed overwhelming material resources rather than demanding overwhelming human sacrifice, that mechanized violence to preserve life. For Japanese soldiers who survived the Pacific War, who returned to a devastated homeland where American bulldozers now cleared rubble and built runways for occupation forces, the machine must have carried a bitter symbolism. The same beast that buried their comrades now reshaped their nation, a fitting emblem for an empire that had challenged industrial modernity with feudal virtues and discovered, in the worst way possible, which would prevail. The jungle where Lieutenant Yamada once watched has long since reclaimed Bougainville's wartime scars. The airstrips are overgrown, the bunkers collapsed, the bulldozers rusted into orange skeletons beneath strangling vines. But the lesson remains etched into the war's terrible ledger, that modern warfare's true measure lies not in courage or strategy alone, but in the capacity to bring overwhelming resources to bear, to transform industrial might into battlefield dominance, to send a machine where other nations sent men to die. In the end, Japan had bet everything on the warrior's spirit. America sent bulldozers. The difference was never close.